I didn't buy the lake cabin to start trouble with anyone. In fact, I bought it to get as far away from people as I could. After 23 years working in hospital administration, dealing with policy changes, budgeting emergencies, and enough complaints to fill a dozen books, I finally got out. I was burned out and fraying at the edges. So I took my savings, cashed out a portion of my pension early, and bought the one thing I'd always wanted but never had: peace. The lake cabin wasn't anything luxurious. It was modest, an old cedar frame, two-bedroom structure with a covered porch that looked out over Lake Needham, a glassy reservoir tucked between two ridges in rural Tennessee. There were maybe 20 or so other cabins scattered around the lake, most of them old family places that had been passed down through generations. Mine was one of the few that had changed hands recently, and from what I was told, the locals didn't much care for newcomers, especially those from out of town. I'd lived my whole life in Nashville, so technically I was a local by state standards, but to this town I was practically a Yankee. Still, I wasn't there to make waves. I just wanted to fish, cook my meals in peace, and maybe invite my grown kids and grandkids down every now and then. I made a few small updates: a new deck, replaced a broken dock with something a bit sturdier, and reinforced a chimney that had almost collapsed from years of raccoon nests and neglect. Nothing flashy, just bringing the place back to life. Then came the first note. I found it tucked under my windshield one morning after fishing. A neatly folded piece of thick stationery with cursive handwriting that looked like it came off a wedding invitation. It read, "The quiet enjoyment of our lake is important to all property owners. Kindly keep noise to a minimum, especially in the evenings. Thank you for your cooperation. LNHI Compliance Committee. NIA, Lake Needham Homeowners Improvement Association." I hadn't heard of them when I bought the place. No mention in the sale papers. No annual dues. No gate or guards. This wasn't some gated lake resort. It was rural, mostly dirt roads and wood piles. So I did what any normal person would do. I looked up the county plat records and deed history. Sure enough, my cabin wasn't part of any HOA. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. I shrugged, threw a note in the fire pit, and went back to what I was doing, playing a little Johnny Cash on the radio while frying catfish on the cast iron over my porch burner. The second note was more direct. This time it came in an envelope, taped to my door, typed, formal, "Dear property owner, your excessive noise levels after dusk violate the tranquility standards established by the Lake Needham Homeowners Improvement Association. You are hereby notified to cease amplified music, shouting, and loud activities after 7 p.m. Failure to comply may result in formal complaints being filed with the county. Respectfully, Karen M. Loring, Chairperson, LNHI Compliance." That's when I met Karen. About 5 feet 2 inches, mid-60s, hair permed so tight it could repel hail. She had the gait of someone who believed she owned every inch of ground she walked on. I spotted her marching down my gravel driveway 2 days after the letter, clipboard in hand, like a mall cop on a mission. She didn't bother knocking. She just stood there and waited until I noticed her through the screen door. "You're the new guy in 14C?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "That's me," I said, stepping out. "Can I help you?" "I'm Karen Loring. I chair the compliance committee for the association. We've had multiple reports of loud music coming from this property after hours." "After hours?" I repeated. "After 7 p.m., she said matter of fact. "Ma'am, I'm not part of your HOA. My deed doesn't say anything about it, and this cabin predates the LNHI by 20 years. I've got no shared roads, no common utilities, nothing tying me to your association." Her lips thinned like she just sucked on a lemon. "Well, we consider the entire lake community to be under one behavioral standard. Whether or not you're formally enrolled, we expect neighbors to abide by common sense noise courtesy." I gestured to the porch radio. It was tuned to a bluegrass station, low enough that I could still hear the birds chirping over it. "This is what you're worried about?" "It carries across water," she snapped. "Sound does. You might not hear it echo, but those of us across the cove do." I looked out across the lake. Most of the homes were set way back, and besides, there wasn't another structure within 100 yards of me. Are you serious? I asked. I am very serious, she said, tapping her clipboard. And you'll find that I'm not easily ignored. She left after that. No threats, just a vague implication that I hadn't heard the last of her. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept my music low. Real low. I even started wearing headphones when I grilled on the porch. It wasn't worth the drama, but it didn't matter. She came back again, this time with a guy named George from something called the Environmental Standards Subcommittee. He had an old decibel reader and claimed my dock fan, which I only turn on when mosquitoes got bad, was too loud and disrupted the nesting patterns of lakeside birds. I laughed. He didn't. That week, I got a knock from a sheriff's deputy. Not one of those intense visits, just a friendly knock, asking if I'd mind keeping it down a bit. Apparently, Karen had filed a complaint with the county sheriff's office for disturbing the peace. The deputy, who introduced himself as Tucker, looked genuinely embarrassed. I had to drive 30 miles out here to check on this, he said, rolling his eyes. She calls every week on someone. Last month, it was a guy running a chainsaw at 6 p.m. She really think my porch radio is some kind of threat to community order? She runs at HOA like it's the White House, he grinned. But unless you're violating a county ordinance, which you're not, I'm just here to check a box. I offered him a beer. He declined because he was on duty, but he told me he moonlighted in a classic rock band with other deputies. Said they called themselves the Deputones. That's when the idea started forming in my head. It would have been easy to shrug the whole thing off. Karen was just another bored retiree with too much time and too many clipboards. I'd seen plenty like her in city councils and hospital boards over the years. Folks who got a taste of authority and started confusing it with law. But out here, it was different. Out here, people didn't have 10 other distractions to keep them sane. They focused their entire energy on the one thing they could control. And for Karen, that was the Lake Needham Homeowners Improvement Association. After Deputy Tucker's visit, I figured she'd gotten her fix. She got attention. She had a form filled out and a box ticked. I even stopped playing music altogether. I'd sit on my dock in total silence, sipping coffee or whiskey, depending on the hour, and just watch the water. No sound, no music, not even talking, just me and the lake. But Karen wasn't satisfied with silence. She wanted submission. One morning, a manila envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside were 5 printed pages of what looked like formal HOA violation citations, each labeled with bold letters at the top. Lake Needham HIA violation, report form, non-compliant property. Location, Lot 14C. Owner, blank, docket hashtag LN 2403A. Each form cited something ridiculous. One said I'd failed to maintain dock alignment with shoreline curvature compliance standards. Another one accused me of unauthorized nighttime lighting that referred to the solar path lights I'd installed along the walkway to the boathouse. Dim as a candle, but apparently a source of visual trauma for someone. A third claimed continued disregard community acoustic etiquette, which, I guess, meant noise. Again, at the bottom of each sheet was a suggested fine. $125, $225, $175. One even said $500 for flagrant and repeated disturbance of peace. Now, here's the kicker. They had no legal authority to collect a single cent from me. As I'd already confirmed, my property wasn't part of the HOA. My land never opted in, my deed didn't mention them, and I had zero obligation to their rules. But that didn't stop Karen from acting like she ran the county. I called the number listed on the paperwork. It was an answering service with a recording of Karen's voice, professionally done, like she was running a dentist's office. I left a message, short and to the point. Karen, stop taping fake fines on my door and mailing empty threats. I'm not in your HOA. You know it, I know it, and the county knows it. Keep this up, and we're going to court. I figured that would be the end of it, but what came next was escalation on a whole new level. That weekend, I had my daughter and her husband come up with their 2 little boys. We grilled burgers on the dock, caught perch off the side, and even did a little night kayaking once the moon was out. It was serene, pure joy. The kids laughed. My daughter smiled for the first time in months. It was everything I'd hoped the cabin would be. And then, on Sunday afternoon, we were packing up the last of the coolers when a white SUV pulled into my gravel lot. Out came Karen. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her were two people I didn't recognize. One a middle-aged man in a green polo with a name badge that read J. Simmons, Environmental Review Officer, and a younger woman with a clipboard and a DSLR camera slung over her neck. The woman began snapping photos immediately of my dock, my solar lights, the barbecue grill, even the kids' inflatable kayak. Karen, I said, marching up, "What the hell is this?" She ignored me and turned to the others. "This is the property in question. I've logged 7 noise violations for light pollution issues and improper dock alignment." "Improper what?" The guy in the green polo stepped up. "Sir, we're conducting an informal environmental impact survey on behalf of the community board. We received multiple complaints about your property's use of non-shielded lighting and recreational activity that may be disruptive to local nesting birds." "Nesting birds?" I laughed. "You're joking." He didn't laugh back. "I'm not in your HOA," I said. "You have no authority to inspect anything. And unless you're the county or the EPA, you're trespassing. This is private property." The woman with the camera started to say something, but I pointed to my driveway. "Off. Now." Karen's face turned beet red. "You don't own the shoreline, you know. That's state land. I have every right to survey the impact of your additions. My dock is permitted by the county." I replied, "Want to see the paperwork? Or should I call Deputy Tucker back and let him explain it to you?" Karen glared at me. "You'll regret this. You're not above the law." "No, ma'am, but I'm also not under your dictatorship." They left, but not without more photos, more scribbles on clipboards, and more implied threats. 3 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail from a law office called Harrington and Fales. It was a cease and desist notice, demanding I immediately cease all noise-generating activity and remove all non-compliant dock features or face civil litigation. Karen had hired a lawyer. I contacted my own, Cynthia Moore, a family friend and pit bull of a property rights attorney. Cynthia reviewed the documents and snorted. "She's blowing smoke," she said. "These letters mean nothing without jurisdiction, and they have none. Can we do something to shut her down?" I asked. "Oh, I'll do more than that. I'll file a counter notice for harassment and civil intimidation." That same day, Cynthia sent a formal letter back. She cited state statutes, quoted case law, and reminded Karen's attorney that falsely representing authority over non-HOA properties could constitute fraud. But the damage wasn't just legal, it was personal. Karen had poisoned the well. I noticed neighbors across the lake wouldn't wave anymore. One even flipped me off when I motored past his cove. Kids stopped biking down my stretch of road. A couple who used to walk their dog past my property suddenly crossed to the other side of the road when they saw me on the porch. Karen had clearly started a whisper campaign. The final straw came one morning at 6:15 a.m. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and was hit by an unholy blast of air horns and music. It wasn't coming from my radio. It was Karen. She had parked her SUV on the dirt road near my dock and was blasting classical opera from speakers mounted on the roof. I walked down the path, stunned. She stood next to her car, arms folded, smiling like the Grinch. "Since you like noise so much," she called out, "I figured I'd bring you some of my own." "You're insane," I said. "No, just passionate about rules." I pulled out my phone, called Tucker. 20 minutes later, he arrived in his cruiser. He stood there, blinking in disbelief as Karen continued blasting La Donna A Mobile at full volume. He turned it off himself, then gave her a warning for noise pollution. "Ironic, huh?" he said to me as Karen argued with him. "Unbelievable," I said. But what Tucker said next lit the fuse. "You know," he said with a smirk, "me and the guys in the band were just talking. We've been looking for a spot to do a little lakeside performance. Nowhere big, just a friendly crowd, nothing official. You would happen to know a spot with a nice dock and an angry HOA lady across the cove. Would you? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Yeah, Tucker, I said. I know just the place. The next 2 weeks passed quietly, at least on the surface. Karen must have sensed the deputy's warning about the opera-spewing SUV incident wasn't something she could brush off so easily, because, for once, there are no more citations, no more mystery inspectors, no notes on my windshield. But I wasn't fooled. Karen was the type who went quiet only when she was planning her next strike. And she had a pattern. Escalate, provoke, gather support, strike again. If I was going to survive this with my sanity intact, I couldn't just play defense anymore. Fortunately, I had a new ally. Deputy Tucker called me a few days after the opera ambush. He was off duty this time, and his voice had the kind of grin you could hear even through the phone. You still up for that lakeside show? I am if you are. He explained that the Deputones, yes, that was really their name, were made up of half the county sheriff's department. Tucker on rhythm guitar and vocals, 2 patrol deputies on bass and keyboard, the lieutenant's daughter on drums, and a retired canine officer who played a wicked fiddle. They'd been playing covers of Southern rock and classic country for years, mostly at VFW halls, town fairs, and charity barbecues. But since the county summer events budget had been cut, they were itching for somewhere to perform, and not just anywhere. They wanted Karen's backyard. We picked a Friday evening. I'd host it from my dock. I had room for maybe 30 people comfortably on my land, and another few dozen on boats if folks anchored nearby. Tucker spread the word quietly. Nothing public. Nothing online. This wasn't a protest. This was just neighbors gathering, enjoying the lake. I started making preparations. First, I called Cynthia, my lawyer, and explained everything I was planning. She laughed harder than I'd ever heard her. "Let me guess," she said. "You're going to throw a legal party that just happens to be within visual and auditory range of one very angry HOA queen?" Something like that. Fine, but no amplified speakers pointed across the water. Keep it reasonable. If she calls the cops, make sure they're your cops. Trust me, I said, they'll already be on stage. I spent 3 days cleaning up the property, mowed the grass, repainted the deck railings, even hung some string lights, low wattage, solar-powered, fully compliant with every ridiculous complaint Karen had ever lodged. My daughter came down with her husband to help set up. I borrowed 24 folding chairs from the local church. Another neighbor let me use his floating dock to create a kind of makeshift stage extension out over the water. And just for good measure, I invited the county clerk and her family. I didn't promote the event on social media. Didn't need to. Word spread fast around Lake Needham. People who'd previously avoided me started waving again. One even brought over homemade peach cobbler as a peace offering. "Heard you're planning a little music night," she said with a wink. "Need any extra parking space?" By the time Friday rolled around, the quiet tension around the lake had curdled into full-blown anticipation. Everyone knew what this was. It wasn't just a lakeside concert. It was a showdown. Karen, of course, had caught wind of it by then. That afternoon, just before sunset, I caught sight of her pacing on her dock across the cove with a pair of binoculars. She was yelling into a phone, probably trying to convince someone, maybe county officials, maybe God himself, that I was staging an illegal concert. She must have realized too late that everything I was doing was above board. Tucker and his band rolled in around 6 p.m. in an old trailer with Deputones spray-painted on the side in faded red letters. They wore jeans and badge-adjacent polos, looking more like tailgaters than lawmen. The whole thing felt informal, homegrown, and totally unstoppable. As the sun dipped behind the trees, people began arriving. Cars parked along the gravel road. Some folks brought lawn chairs. Others floated over on pontoons and tied up just off my dock. Kids played in the grass. Dogs wandered between coolers. Someone started passing out cornbread muffins and sweet tea in mason jars. And then the music started. Not loud, just right. Smooth country harmonies rolled across the water, backed by soft guitar, drum taps, and the occasional fiddle solo that made the hairs on your neck stand up. The first song was Folsom Prison Blues. Half the crowd sang along. Karen stood on her deck the entire time, arms crossed, rigid, eyes burning. She had a long-range camera now and was snapping photos every 2 minutes. At one point, she waved down a pontoon boat and started yelling at the driver to turn back because the lake was under siege. He laughed and kept drifting toward the dock. Then she made her move, about an hour in, just as the Deputones were launching into Take It Easy by the Eagles. Karen pulled out her phone and dialed. You could tell from the way she paced and gestured with her free hand that she was summoning reinforcements. 15 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up, but not just any deputy. It was Lieutenant Granger, the band's usual drummer and also Tucker's boss. He got out of the car, gave a little nod toward the crowd, and then walked over to the dock like a celebrity returning to the stage. Karen practically sprinted across the lawn to intercept him. Lieutenant, this is an illegal gathering. There's amplified music, unlicensed food distribution, crowding, dock violations, and I'm certain some people are trespassing on state shoreline. Granger looked around calmly. Evening, Miss Loring. Looks like a friendly get-together to me. There are over 75 people here. That's a mass gathering. He's using loudspeakers. He's orchestrating a public performance without a permit. Granger gave her a tight-lipped smile. The speakers are battery-powered, decibel levels under 70, and it's private property. I checked the ordinances myself. And since there's no money changing hands, there's no permit needed. But you can hear it across the lake. That's how sound works, he replied dryly. Karen turned purple. I want this shut down immediately. If you won't do it, I'll go to the mayor. You're welcome to do that, Granger said, stepping past her. But for now, I'm due back on drums. He climbed onto the dock and was met with applause. The Deputones launched into Sweet Home Alabama. The whole crowd roared. Karen stormed back across the cove. But the real retaliation was just beginning. Throughout the rest of the evening, people came up to me, neighbors I hadn't even met, thanking me for hosting. They'd been tired of Karen's power play for years, but never had the nerve to challenge her. Turns out, she'd tried to get someone fined for hanging wind chimes. Another family told me she once wrote them up for letting their teenage daughter sunbathe on a floating raft, called it public indecency. She tried to fine us $200 for a bird feeder, one woman whispered, shaking her head. Another guy offered to help build a permanent stage dock if I ever wanted to do this monthly. And the best part? One of the county commissioners was there too. Incognito, sitting in a folding chair with a cowboy hat pulled low. He approached me after the last song. Heard about what she's been pulling, he said. You're not the first, but you might be the last. What do you mean? He handed me a business card. Karen's been operating that HOA like her personal fiefdom. There's been complaints. Quiet ones. But what you did tonight, you lit a fire. Expect some calls next week. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. As the crowd began to pack up and the band dismantled their gear, Karen stood across the lake in the dark. Phone still pressed to her ear, likely leaving voicemail for anyone in government who would listen. She thought she'd crush me with her threats, her citations, her lawyers. But tonight, she learned the one thing she couldn't control was everyone else. I didn't sleep much the night before the event. Not from anxiety, more from anticipation. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept imagining the look on Karen's face when she realized just who was showing up at my so-called noise disturbance. Not a rowdy biker gang or a DJ with bass speakers. Oh no, it was going to be a professionally trained group of uniformed officers with instruments, the Sheriff's Honor Band. And every last one of them had been invited, vetted, and protected under county law to play music in a private citizen space, especially when that citizen was not violating any noise ordinances. I had the documentation ready. Copies of the county sound regulations, a special use permit issued by a very cooperative friend of the sheriff's office, and, perhaps most satisfying, a formal RSVP from the sheriff himself. Morning broke on the day of the event with the crisp smell of dew and the sound of birds flitting between pine branches. My cabin looked beautiful, decorated with red, white, and blue string lights. Folding chairs lined the grass near the lake, and a small wooden platform served as a makeshift stage for the band. Volunteers from the local VFW brought coolers and snacks, and my friend Greg, who happened to be a professional barbecue caterer, was already smoking brisket on site. By 10 a.m., trucks and SUVs were rolling in, and uniformed deputies began unloading instruments, brass, percussion, even a small upright piano. The guys were laughing, relaxed, and clearly thrilled to have a casual gig out in the countryside. Around noon, the first sounds of warming up instruments drifted across the trees. The woodwinds ran their scales, the brass tested notes, and the drums gave off a few testing pops. It was glorious chaos, the kind that builds into something magical. Then, of course, the peace was shattered, but not by the music. Karen's door swung open with such force I half expected it to fall off the hinges. Out she stormed, wearing a sun visor, oversized sunglasses, and what I can only describe as a lemon-yellow jumpsuit that somehow made her look both rich and furious. She marched across the gravel road, heels clicking like a metronome of rage, hands already holding a phone to her ear. "Hello, yes. There are uniformed officers playing music on a residential property." She barked into the phone loud enough for everyone to hear. "They brought a full marching band to a lake cabin. It's an abuse of power, I tell you." I calmly walked to meet her at the end of my drive, papers in hand. "Good morning, Karen." She didn't acknowledge me. She was too deep into the performance. They're setting up amplifiers and a stage. I want them cited for noise pollution, property abuse, and intimidation. I gave a small smile and tapped my watch. "You're just in time for the first number. Patriotic medley." "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You're bringing cops to play music to mock me? That's harassment." "I didn't bring the police to harass you," I replied evenly. "I brought them because they enjoy music and wanted to raise money for veterans programs. That's all." She stared at me, blinking as the truth sank in. Veterans, charity, uniformed law enforcement, all legally invited, all documented. "You're abusing your connections," she said weakly, lowering her phone. "Nope," I replied, handing her a copy of the county noise code. "Not even close. Everything's within the rules. Music starts at 1, ends by 5. Decibel levels will stay below the legal threshold. And just so we're clear," I stepped a little closer, my voice low enough to sting without shouting. "This is a private gathering on my land. You don't have standing to interfere." For a moment, she didn't move. Then her face twisted. "You're just doing this to spite me." I leaned back and gave a casual shrug. "You called the sheriff about noise complaints that didn't exist. He decided the best way to check if my setup was a problem was to hear it for himself." Right on cue, the man himself pulled into the gravel drive. Sheriff Walters stepped out of his vehicle, in full uniform, cowboy hat and all. He gave Karen a polite nod and walked past her toward me, raising his hand for a fist bump. "Hope I'm not late, Rick." "You're just in time," I grinned. "Want to meet the band before they kick off." Karen spun toward him, arms flailing like spaghetti in the wind. "You can't do this. You're violating community peace." Sheriff Walters glanced down at the documents in her hand, already knowing what they said. "Karen, I'm not here as law enforcement today. I'm here as a musician. We're following all laws, permits, and codes. If you have an issue, you're welcome to file a civil complaint. But let's not pretend this is about noise. It's about control." And with that, he tipped his hat and walked toward the platform. Karen's jaw opened and shut like a gasping fish, but there was nothing left to say. She stomped back to her house and slammed the door, so hard when her garden flamingos fell over. The band began their first number, a full, rich brass rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. People stood with their hands on their hearts. Some sang along, a few wiped tears. And from her second-story window, Karen peeked out like a villain in a Saturday morning cartoon. As the music played, more neighbors showed up, people I hadn't even personally invited. They brought kids, lawn chairs, even homemade pies. A couple who'd once complained about parking space disputes came over and apologized for listening to Karen's gossip. "Didn't know you were such a good guy," one said. "We thought you were some rich city slicker trying to turn the lake into a party spot. But this is nice." That moment felt better than revenge. Karen had spent so long painting me as the outsider, the problem, the noise, and now the whole neighborhood saw the truth. She was a drama. As the sun dipped lower and the band transitioned into a jazzy rendition of Sweet Caroline, something even better happened. A local news van pulled up. Turns out, one of the deputies posted a short video on social media titled, "Sheriff's Band Gives Surprise Performance at Lake Cabin Barbecue." It had already gained 40,000 views in 2 hours. The news team filmed B-roll of the band, the crowd, and even interviewed Sheriff Walters. I tried to avoid the camera, but they insisted I give a quick soundbite. I kept it short and respectful. I just wanted to bring people together. That's what this place is about. Peace, community, and maybe a little music. It aired that night during prime time. Karen? She called the station demanding a retraction, claiming she'd been framed as the villain in her own neighborhood. They didn't air her side of the story. Why would they? She'd had weeks to make her case, and all she'd done was throw tantrums and call the police for trumped-up reasons. The best part? The final line of the broadcast was a quote from Sheriff Walters. Sometimes the best way to drown out negativity is with a little music. Mic drop. The entire shoreline shimmered in gold as the sun began to set behind the pines. That night, the night of the Sheriff's Department charity concert, felt like something out of a movie. Folding chairs were lined up in rows across the lawn. Lanterns hung from the eaves. Picnic tables were full of potluck dishes. Coolers hissed open. Children laughed. Neighbors smiled. Even the deputies had rolled up their sleeves and were tossing beanbags in a friendly game of cornhole. The only thing that hadn't shown up yet was Karen. I stood on the back porch, scanning the long gravel driveway that led down from the road. My wife was inside finishing up the dessert trays, and my buddy Mike, who had helped with the sound system, was making final checks on the mic levels. The sheriff's bluegrass band, yep, the actual deputies themselves, were tuning guitars, adjusting their boots, and cracking jokes with the crowd. I should have been nervous. After all, this whole event had started because Karen had filed 3 noise complaints in the same week. But tonight wasn't about noise. It was about making a point and doing it with a smile and a two-step. The entire lakeside community had shown up to support us. And best of all, the local sheriff himself was about to go on stage, strum a banjo, and sing Wagon Wheel. Right at 7:01 p.m., the rumble of tires on gravel made heads turn. Karen's Lexus SUV crawled into view, nosing its way past a string of parked cars. She parked right at the top of the hill, uninvited, and stepped out in a crisp beige suit jacket and low heels, arms crossed, mouth pinched into a frown like someone just fed her a lemon. Her mother, whom most folks simply referred to as the enforcer, followed close behind, holding a clipboard. They marched straight down the slope like they owned the place. "Excuse me," Karen said in that tone of forced politeness that always precedes disaster. "What's going on here?" She already knew, of course. I gave her a neighborly nod. "Evening, Karen. We're holding a charity fundraiser for the Sheriff's Department. It's a private event on private land, but you're welcome to enjoy the music." Karen's eyes darted around, as if trying to count potential code violations. You don't have a live music permit for this kind of gathering. There's sound ordinances after 7 p.m. And don't think just because the sheriff is here, you're immune from consequences. She said that loudly, as if trying to perform it for an imaginary HOA board. Unfortunately for her, the sheriff was standing less than 15 feet away, guitar in hand, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a grin that could melt butter. He strolled over, took his hat off politely, and offered her a handshake. "Good evening, ma'am. Sheriff Dale Marlowe. I'm the one responsible for the music tonight." Karen didn't take the handshake. "You're a sheriff. This is improper. You can't use government property." "Actually, ma'am," he interrupted, "this is my band, and we play for free at charity events. Tonight we're raising funds for emergency rescue equipment for this district. You're welcome to make a donation." Her mother tried a new tactic. "We believe there may be violations concerning amplified noise equipment, unregistered gatherings, and potential fire hazards from open flame lighting." I gestured toward the lanterns, solar-powered LEDs, and the stage. No actual amplification, just some speakers for balance. Everything was clear with the county weeks ago. I said calmly, "I even have the email confirmation, if you'd like to see it." At that moment, something incredible happened. An older woman who lived across the lake, who had until now kept to herself in a folding chair with her husband, stood up and approached Karen. She had a walker and moved slowly, but with purpose. "I lost my son in a fire 2 years ago," she said, voice steady. "Your complaints nearly got this man fined for letting firefighters train near his cabin. But today, thanks to this community, we're donating enough to fund new equipment for the very people who saved 3 lives last year. Maybe try not ruining everything." It was dead silent for a beat. Karen blinked. Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. The sheriff cleared his throat. "If there's no further objections," he said into the mic, "we'd like to kick off the night with a little something called 'She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy.'" And with that, the place exploded with laughter and applause. The band started playing. The music flowed. The crowd cheered. Karen and her mother stood there awkwardly for a full minute, then turned and marched back to the car. But that wasn't the end. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the County Code Enforcement Office. But it wasn't a fine. It was a commendation, a thank you letter for helping raise over $12,000 in donations for emergency services. They included an official certificate, a handwritten note from the sheriff himself, and a new sticker for my property gate that read, "Community Partner in Public Safety, Sheriff's Office District 7. That sticker? It might as well have been garlic to a vampire. From that day on, Karen stopped walking past my gate. She stopped filing complaints, stopped inspecting my garbage bins or peeking over the fence to see if my boat trailer had moved 2 inches to the left. Word traveled fast. HOA meetings suddenly went silent whenever I entered the room. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Not because I was loud, but because I knew how to make the right kind of noise at the right time with the right people. Later that summer, I got a phone call from the sheriff's office again. They wanted to know if I'd consider hosting another community event, this time for retired veterans. And this time, they'd bring a full barbecue trailer and a dunk tank. I said yes, of course. And guess who had to drive past my gate that day, watching over 100 happy residents cheer and dunk the HOA vice president into a pool of Cold Lake water? Karen. She rolled by in silence, windows up, no clipboard, just a bitter look at the man who used to be her favorite target and was now the honorary host of the most beloved event the lake had ever seen. The noise she hated? It was a sound of her influence fading into irrelevance. And I made sure the band played an encore.